Hello and welcome back to the Ludiverse. It's Jay, your host, and right next to me, literally in the same room, is.
Courtney, hi.
So this is a milestone episode, and to top it all off, we have one of the financial supporters actually on the show. Care to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Zach. Been listening since first episode and been supporting since I think second episode.
Fair enough, and much appreciated. So, what brought you onto the show today? What is it that you want to talk about?
Oh, well, I was given a topic because I can kind of speak to a lot of different things in the community. I've been a part of it since I was 14, was operating off of a fake ID because I grew facial hair early, and I've been part of communities in Chicago, Jacksonville, Florida, well, up and down the Florida coast, North Carolina, Connecticut, New Hampshire, and Maine. And I'm currently 37, to give you a little bit of a time aspect on that. And I've just collected stories, experiences. I did some professional work up in the Northeast and down in Florida. And let me tell you, it's hard being a straight cis male in the community as a pro-dom. Just because there are so many predators out there. There's so many just people trying to get a leg up on other individuals that they abuse it. And once you're known as that, someone's got a story about you. And once you get into that community or you get into a region and you establish yourself as part of that community, the communities are good about insulating their own. I think my best experience with it was I was living in West DC, well, Nova, West DC, that entire metro area. And we found a really good munch out of Herndon. And by the third munch, they did them every other week. And by the third munch, I sat down with the guy that hosted the munch. And he's like, so any questions, comments, concerns? And there was a guy. I had three other coworkers. I was working at a large professional IT corp at the time. And three of my other coworkers were at the same munch, which was hilarious for all of us. But one of them ended up getting blacklisted by the local community because there was an event, consent was violated. It was in a private desk room and there was no one else there. So there was no one to really corroborate it with. But the community was really healthy in the fact that we knew the individuals involved. And when one continually shifts his story and one's showing us the marks going, this was not consented to. This was done without permission. And it was like, okay, so now we know. And he was, disinvited from the munch, and a number of the other munches, they talk. And we were able to isolate a mental health problem. It eventually came out at work and affected his personal life as well, or his professional life as well. And it was good to run into a community like that. But I've also seen in Western Connecticut, there's a couple that are extremely hierarchical, where if you walk into an event, not a munch. The munches are still good place to share ideas, get the feel for people, things like that. But when you go to an event, especially a privately hosted event at a house, there were expectations that were not previously discussed prior to walking into that situation. And so it was real easy for me to turn around and walk right back out because that's not what I'm here for. A little bit of background on me. I'm the oldest of six. The rest between the oldest and youngest are all girls. I dealt with being raised
right?
Oh, yeah. Well, I was raised by a Marine and a teacher. So I got, schooled at home on everything from Marine doctrine to mom getting me reading chapter books by the time I was in kindergarten. So it gave a very unique perspective on the consent issue, the protection issue. I'm kind of like everyone's big brother. Like, I'm going to let you do something stupid, but if you're threatened by someone outside of what you're doing that's stupid, then I'm going to stop that. But I'm going to let you learn the lesson you need to learn.
Yeah, that's usually the way to go about it. I mean, that's how I deal with my kids.
Yeah, same here. But I know what Courtney had presented to me was giving the perspective on sadistic doms and how they differ from, your everyday run-of-the-mill, even some of your pro-doms, what the boundary differences run there. And I think in what I've seen, you have doms that have their niche. But sadistics only really come in one of two varieties. You're healthy and you're harmful. It's very easy when negotiating with a new sub. And the fact that so many people still find it foreign that you negotiate with a sub until they're in a healthy community, until they talk with people that have been in the community or the older members of the community. Because I've known a rookie walk into a community at between 35 and 40, but they've got enough life experience that they're like, hold on. And they can make more reasoned decisions than if you jump into it when you're young, stupid, and they're just like, hey, I want to do blank. And you're not going into a community, but you're trying it privately. A lot of things can get skewed. And then I think those are usually the more hazardous that I find is when a young guy or woman finds that they've got this sadistic edge, that they genuinely take pleasure out of it. But they're not so worried about their partner in it. And that's where the consent lines can blur, especially if, they're going after an old hometown friend. And the hometown friend's like, oh, that sounds a little cool. Yeah, let's try that. And that if they don't have the emotional measurement to keep the sadist in check, then they end up doing real damage, and you can traumatize a person quite easily if you don't walk into a sadistic dom, masochistic sub situation properly. I have a mental health background before I went into IT. I found that it was easier to work on computers than people because computers have to listen to you. But one of the things that I found, I used to work with DSS in North Carolina when I was pursuing my psychology profession, and you see some horrible things there, and that's not even considering the sexual aspect or the kink aspect. And that kind of rounded out how I approach doming, whether it's professionally, personally, how I deal with it in my own life. And I mean, there's been a lot of talks between me and other doms where we really want to kind of put together like a national register of ideas and see if we can't come up with like a standard for how things should be approached and like post it on FED or something. Now, a number of communities have done this. Like, this is how we operate our community, things you should know, things like that. And it's good to see that that's becoming more prevalent, especially because, I mean, you just dial the clock back 15 years, 20 years. You had to know someone who knew someone who knew someone to even get invited to an event. And now that we've got the World Wide Web as it stands, I think the biggest issue that I have is the buyer's remorse. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm huge. My biggest thing is consent and honesty. But the buyer's remorse, when you get into a situation that is properly discussed, properly thought out, and hey, this is what we're going to do. We're going to go slow with this. This is how we're going to broach it. And then the person walks away from that situation. And then that week or 2 weeks later, something happens or someone finds out about it in the vanilla world. And they're like, oh no, I was assaulted. And those accusations start flying. That's one of the biggest issues that I have with some of the turns I've seen in society today, is that personal responsibility for saying, yeah, I gave it a shot. I wasn't a fan, and just move on with it. But when you're talking, down south, early 20-something, meets a guy, really thinks she's into this. But it's happened on the other side too, where guys are like, well, I wasn't assaulted, but that wasn't what happened. And it's like, I have a real problem with people just not owning their choices. And Courtney can attest, when it comes to the discussions of this, I'm very upfront, I'm very blunt, and it's, hey, is this a thing you're into? Is this a thing you're into? And, what I try to do is, whether it's professional or like first time meeting with any potential new sub or, woman that's interested in that, there's a conversation. And I have a rule that I've operated off of since my early 20s to keep me in check, because I might get overexcited too. So how do I check myself and walk into this with both eyes open? And that's what I call the tabletop discussion. And when I went into the pro world in the Northeast, I had paperwork drawn up for it in every kink I could think of. Do you want to be flagellated? Do you want to be flagellated with actual flagellation gear? Do you want to be caned? If you don't want to be caned, do you like metalwork? Are we doing industrial rigging? Are we doing rope rigging? Are we doing, duct tape? And it was about 6 pages, but you go through each one and go, yes, no, maybe. And that at least gives you an outline. And then I go over what I'm good with and where my hard limits are. But if I know a dom that can meet one of those other needs, be like, hey, if you're looking into this, I know a guy. And then from that discussion, there's got to be at least a week before whatever event unfolds. If it's a professional one, I usually try to give 2 weeks. That way it gives a week for negotiation. They go home, they think about it, and they're like, hey, I kind of want to change a couple things. Okay, no problem. Give me a call. I'll mark it up on the paperwork, and then we'll check it before everything goes. Because you get to certain floor shows, and you're always fishing for people that want to hop up on stage, because you don't always get volunteers, or your volunteers aren't always the safest people to have on stage. So you want to evolve that conversation and make sure that you're starting that dialogue, because then when it comes time, anything can happen. But if you've got as many bases covered as possible, when something goes wrong, you know how many bases you've got covered, and you know where you need to focus.
Exactly. Kind of falls under what again?
Communication.
Consent and communication both, because I don't believe in silent consent. That is one thing that has bugged me up and down the coast, and I found it more in the northwest, Maine and eastern New Hampshire and north and South Carolina, where they didn't say no. And that's never an option for me. Like every time I'm taking a new step, especially with someone new or in a performance, it's hey. And even if it's like if the show is Big Bad Dumb versus Scared Meek Lamb, I still will get close and give them that slight whisper. Hey, we're moving on to blank, and then we have a signal. Usually nonverbal, where even if it's like blink once for yes, twice for no, if you need a break, or if I'm unique in the fact that my safe word for most of the people I work with is stop.
Yeah, that's my safe word.
Because
stop. I mean, that's pretty fucking plain. Pretty simple.
Yes. Well, and the thing is that originally they used to say that you might be so overcome that you'll say stop and not mean it. Well, if you want me to have the mental wherewithal and the emotional discipline to keep my hand in check at a split second, then I expect you to be cognitively aware of what's happening to you and know when you need the break. Now,
exactly.
In the middle of a session, especially private ones, I will do the light check, red, yellow, green. With my nesting partner, it's very much, whenever we're trying out something new, about every 5 minutes or so, hey, where are you at? Green, yellow, red. Okay. Yellow, if it's bondage, take a little bit of the tension off. If it's caning, give a few minutes to catch breath. Whatever it may be, there's ways to moderate it. The hardest part is when you're doing a suspension rig, because if they start hitting yellow, then you need to start undoing the rig. But it's a lot of the active communication, the active participation of both parties. Now, don't get me wrong. There can be a lot of fun in, if you want that completely overpowering and you just want to be the one lane there. I get that. I've seen that dynamic work. It's worked for me in the past. But it has to be discussed. And if I ask the question, then even if you don't want to say anything because it'll wreck the headspace you're in, then, a finger tap. If you tap me with one finger, yes, 2 fingers, stop, because I am very, in my earlier days, everyone has their hiccups. And I didn't know in the earlier days, there wasn't so much talk about aftercare for both sides. I mean, there was usually some consideration given to the sub, especially in the late 90s, early 2000s. There would be that discussion of, hey, make sure they're breathing. But there were some communities that I dealt with that very much that was their only check was that pulse check's good. They're probably just going to need to sleep it off. And it's like, but look at how aware mental health wise and how accepting we were mental health wise of showing that weakness, especially anywhere below the Mason-Dixon. But then the funny consistency that I found getting up to Connecticut through my 20s and into my 30s and New Hampshire and Maine was that they espoused mental health and checking in and talking about it. But once you talked about it, any kink or extremity was drawn away from them, finding partners that would dom them or work with them. There was less willingness to do so. Oh, well, we don't know where you are mentally. We want to make sure you're stable. And it's like, dudes, I talked about it once. I got over it. I took my breath. We're good. And seeing that almost cultural hypocrisy, and it's only in certain groups. Like, I will definitely give excellent props to the NELA Association out of Manchester, New Hampshire. That's the New England Leather Aficionados. Great community that I worked with up there. That was back in, that'd be between 05 and 08. I don't think they got like heavily organized for a little while. Sins in Chicago did good work. They're now Sins. They weren't then. And then there's bits and pieces. The way that the Crucible is run in DC, it's actually a playhouse in DC. They do great work. Found an interesting play group called Kinky Shakespeare. They do performances biannually, and they take Shakespeare, they twist it with a little bit of kink, and then they put on our show in Crucible. Nice. And me and my partner had an excellent experience with that.
That would be fun to watch.
Right?
Oh, it's freaking great. If you watch the Crucible's webpage, they should have the next performance when they're coming out. I'll take a look at the Kinky Shakespeare page and touch base with you guys after this if you're interested. Crucible's just on the edge of DC, so it's on the western, northwestern edge of DC, but it's in DC.
Yeah, but even if not for me to go see it, I can throw a link in the show notes, and maybe somebody that's listening would be into going to see that.
Yeah, absolutely. But there are a lot of good and healthy communities out there. I'm not going to give any credence to the bad ones because there are good people in those communities, and I don't want them being, espouses bad people for any listeners that might hear and be associated with those organizations. But there are bad ones out there. All I can say is keep your eyes open, listen to your instincts. If something feels off, it never hurts to walk away. You can always come back later. I think that's the best rule that I give anybody that I know that's getting into the community for the first time is, always understand you can walk away. It's completely in your power. And I don't care if you're a Dom, sub, kinkster, curious, don't have a fucking clue, switch, whatever you are. Always know that you have the power to say, I'm done here and walk away. Oh, I almost forgot. One of my favorite places, best setup I've ever seen, Rosehaven out in West Virginia. It is a bed and dungeon. So...
yeah, I remember you talking to me about that.
If you get familiar with if you look them up, you can look them up on FET. You work with the owner, get to know him a little bit, talk with him via email or whatever else. You can rent the place for a weekend. And it is a 3-bedroom, 2-bath house with an associated 4-car garage that has been converted into a full-service dungeon. But you need to be responsible. If you use anything, they have all the cleaning materials there. Leave it in better condition than you arrived. Because I won with spouse's praises, but at the same time, I don't want people going in and trashing this place. The owner of Rosehaven, haven't got permission to use his name, but I did get permission to espouse his blessings. Me and my partner did that for our joint birthday because we both have August birthdays. And so we split the difference between them and took a weekend out at Rosehaven. And we didn't wear clothes the whole weekend. You could shift seamlessly from house to garage. It was great.
That's awesome.
That sounds like fun.
Right?
Yeah, it was a very, very good time. And they also have quarterly parties where once, the community's comfortable with you and they know you, you might get invited to a party. If you get invited, I strongly encourage you to go. But yeah, and there are, again, the biggest thing is safety, safety, safety. And I know I got so deviatedly off track about the difference in sadistic Doms and other Doms, but there's just a lot. My partner put it like this. She goes, well, I hope you shouldn't be too anxious about this because this is doing what you do every time you meet a new person that's either interested in kink or in kink. You talk about what you know. And I'm like, that's fair.
Yep. It's just a regular conversation.
Yeah, I mean, it may not be exactly on topic for what was planned, but it's all good information, and that's what this show's all about. So
Exactly.
Fair enough. But something that I did want that tweaked my brain when Courtney first gave me the topic is it's not only for Doms that are considering that path that feel that they have a sadistic edge, but also the subs. And the big thing being is if you find something you don't like, because in sadistic and masochistic power play, it's almost always FBE. I mean, you've got that full power exchange, because if you gradient it, then you're not embedding that sadism or that masochism release. The big thing being is like we've said a couple of times, communication, but also that ability and that trust, at least tenuously established, that if a safe word is used, if stop is used, whatever needs to be used, that Dom has enough mental clarity to be able to pull himself back from it. Because I've seen people that they'll get in the zone and they just go to town, especially on extreme canings or extreme whippings, and they've completely bypassed hearing a safe word, and it results in trauma that may never be approached again. And for especially the masochists that I've dealt with in my world, this is it's actually very specifically a type of therapy. It's being able to give up that release. I know for me, when I can tap into the sadist and actually let it roll, that I absolutely go to town, but I've put those checks and balances on myself where I've already gone over the do's and don'ts in my head 100 times before we even get to, hey, here's the St. Andrews rack. I've played multiple scenarios over in my head of, am I going to lose myself to this, especially if it bridges near any of my particular kinks. I'm kind of a catch-all when it comes to Doms. I've tried everything once, twice if I liked it, 3 times if I wanted to keep going. And it's, in my younger days, I had to fight it off too. But my concern, because of being an older brother, because of, especially after my kids were born, I mellowed out a lot. Like, I think I left the scene for like 2.5, 3 years. Just because I didn't know how to balance the care and regard that I gave to my children and be able to flip that switch into the hard sadist again. So I just backed away from the community for a while. And then I found my balance with it again. But that's the biggest thing, is being able to self-regulate. A masochist needs to know that, even when you're in the deep headspace, when you feel something wrong, you know it's wrong. The masochist is going to know immediately that it's wrong. And the sadist has to be keyed in enough to the masochist to be able to say, okay, fun's over. Let's take a breather. Let's mellow it out. Let's make sure they're okay. And that's the big part. Make sure they're okay. If you're getting into something that you don't know the impact of, do the research. The internet has more than enough photos, videos, every fucking thing else of what happens at the end of these, whether it be pinnings, whether it be canings, whether it be needlework, whether it be whatever it may be. You can find video of it online and you can say, okay, so afterwards, this is what it looks like. Yep. And you need to know how to take care of that, even if it's, a warm towel across your ass because, it's black and blue and you need to help break up the clotting a little bit. Try to make sure that your aftercare equals your fervor during the scene.
Oh, yeah. I know exactly what you mean by that.
No, I'm sure you do. We've had many of those conversations.
Yep, I've had a black and blue ass before, and the biggest thing is not fun.
I'm liking the fact that I'm seeing that more social turn towards personal responsibility in the community. Like, you don't get the boys will be boys mentality that we had in the late 90s, early 2000s, but you also don't have women getting away with going to an extreme because they were she-women man-haters who became doms, and they just go to town, and the guy's just expected to handle it. I've seen a guy walk into a scene perfectly healthy, walk out with 2 dislocated shoulders and a fractured lower leg.
Good Lord.
And it was ridiculous. And the community was like, oh, well, he'll be fine.
Oh, my God.
And it's like someone could at least give him a fucking ride to the hospital. If you've got a medic, I will say, I am always appreciative of how many medical professionals I find in the BDSM world. That was what actually inspired me to get certified surgical assistant. Basic field stitching, things like that. But it actually came in handy for floor show, especially when you do the hook suspension. Like, up until that, I wasn't really comfortable performing hook suspensions because, sometimes they'd rip a little bit and I didn't know how to put them back together. We usually had someone at the show that was like, oh, I've got this, no worries. You did your part, good job, I got this. But I didn't like that. I like closing out my own loops. And between that and a few corpsmen that I knew while I was in the Navy, I made sure that I got brushed up on. But a lot of it is having that responsibility and the personal responsibility to your craft, I think, is my big thing. If you're going to say, this is what I do, then do it well. Do the research. Put in the legwork. Don't just say, oh, this is what I am, and then beat the shit out of somebody and say it's okay.
Yeah, I had some EMT training before I went in the Navy, but it actually came in handy a couple times for some things that I never, like you go into it and it's like, I won't need these skills here, but then you find out you do, and it's like, well, I'm glad I have those skills.
That actually brings up another good point. No matter how many times you've done a thing with a specific person, if it's with a new person or that person has had a major life change or something like that, always ask the questions and always be prepared for the answer to shift. I had one particular partner that we didn't have an occurrence between us for almost a decade. In that period, she had 2 kids, and she used to be really big into heavy caning. Like, we're talking black and blue from shoulders to ass. And that was what she strove for. And, 3 snaps with the cane 10 years later, and she was like, hey, we're going to need to shift because this isn't doing what it used to. And I'm like, okay, no problem. But that's me. If it had been another dom, who's to say that wouldn't have been ignored? And, because, we did this before. It'll be perfectly fine. We'll just do it. We'll just handle it like that again.
No, it's always good to re-up with your sub.
But
I'm actually going through that now with one of my old doms. He just recently started talking to me again, and we started hanging out, and we're just sort of slowly talking more and more about different things that I'm still into, what I'm not into anymore, things like that.
That's a healthy interaction, and it's glad to hear that it goes on.
Yeah, and that falls into the whole consent cycle because at any point during anything,
absolutely, consent
can be withdrawn. And a lot of people used to not understand that. They were like, well, she said yes when we started, or they said yes when we started, so that means that I'm good to go until it's done. And that's not always the case. And then you end up with a lot of, rape accusations that aren't listened to because it started
the biggest
off
thing,
with
and that's
consent.
where the social awareness needs to come up. Now, I will say, 50 Shades pissed me off just because, and I've heard it referenced. The only reason that I reference it was I'm also part of the occult community, and it
Back
was really
to the
funny
subject.
that the 50 Shades did for BDSM and kink what the craft did to the occult back in the 90s. It gave people a few words and tricky phrases to help them blend better into communities they didn't fully understand. And in that first couple of years after the books came out, and heaven help us when the movies came out, it was bad in a lot of places where, munches were starting to get more and more activity, and the community runners were like, hey, this is awesome. But then, you have an event and 6 or 7 people come out going, oh, that wasn't at all what I thought. Well, I thought you said you'd been into this for a while. Well, no, I just read this book or I just saw this movie. And we all knew exactly what it was. And we're like, are you freaking kidding me?
Yeah, I keep hearing a lot of people talk about how much garbage 50 Shades of Grey is. But, I mean, the one good thing is that it did bring the BDSM lifestyle in a form to more of the public consciousness so that it's not just something talked about in
you want to
hushed
talk about
tones
one of the
private
healthiest
corners.
BDSM movies I've ever seen, and maybe not healthiest, but I think the healthiest resolution I ever saw. The original Secretary. It's absolutely awesome because this girl finds
I've heard that.
she loves this. She thrives on this. It gives her sense. It gives her purpose. It gives her direction. She likes the solidarity of it. And she's definitely a brat. I mean, she does things wrong on purpose. But it's great. But the Dom pulls away because he's starting to feel. Because for him, it's just that side of his aspect. It shouldn't touch his heart. And as he starts to feel, he just dismisses her. And how that resolution kind of fights back and forth. It's very interesting. And if there's any particular point you want to focus on, by all means, bring it up. I've probably either have a personal story or I was at an incident or because me and a lot of the other Doms, we talk about more the failures than the successes because everybody loves a good kink story. But to enrich the Dom community, you have to talk about what's gone wrong.
Right. Ignoring the problems means they never get fixed. So
Exactly.
Yeah. So you keep bringing up the word munch. And
Yes.
I don't know what that word means, and there's a good chance that other people listening may not know also. So could you maybe explain what that is?
Okay, not a problem. You go into a new area. Now, mind you, I move rather regularly, probably 45 times in my life. And every time I get into a new area, since I've been in the kink community, and especially since FetLife came out, you can look for what's called a munch. A munch in idealism should be a vanilla, neutral setting, usually lunch or dinner meeting at a public venue where people can come, meet, discuss, talk. But usually you're coming in not in your bondage gear or not, dressed to the nines unless it's, a formal munch, which some are. And black tie affair where everybody's there for the same thing, which is very rare, but it has happened to me twice in my life where I walked up to the place and realized I was way underdressed and was like, I'll be back in 30 minutes. But these are no pressure. Well, again, they're supposed to be no pressure, walk in, meet and greet, kind of get a feel for this group of people that likes to hang out. One thing that I saw in Nova, Northern Virginia, far more than I saw anywhere else, was a lot of munches in a small geographic area, but it's also the suburb of DC. So you have a lot of people packed into a small area, and not all those people got along. Or they just had a couple of ideological conflicts on how things should be approached. And so they started up different munches. And I went to, I'd say 6 of them in that area. And there was only one that left a bad taste in my mouth. And that was just because there was a lot of pressure on new people coming in. Like, it just felt like, okay, so what are your kinks? What side of the line are you falling on, top or bottom? And, oh, well, you should talk to so-and-so because they've been looking for something like that. And it seemed like there was a very big hookup pressure to that munch. But the other 5 were very, hey, come on in. Get your drink order in, and they were all at restaurants. My personal favorite was the Herndon Munch. Tom and Lisa are no longer hosting it. As far as I understand, they are enjoying their new life out in Nevada, but they left it in good hands. I'm not entirely sure who's running it post-COVID, but very, very mellow. It was at this great little diner called Amphora. They do great baked goods, but you go in, have a meal. If it's just you, $15 will get you fed, liquid in you, and you have a good conversation. There was no pressure on us to leave or vacate the area. And that munch runner had worked it out with the management so that every other week, unless they had because it was a banquet room in the back, they had it set up so that if they didn't have a better paying event come in, we would go in there and freaking take the hall. And we could usually fill up 4 tables. And Tom had this great party trick where he remembered everyone's name there, even if they hadn't been to one in 3 or 4 months. But you immediately felt that you were at least comfortable. They'd ask you, so what brings you? Where'd you hear about us? Who'd you hear about us from? And then, okay, meet, greet, be social. There was never, at the end of the month, most of them would discuss events going on in the area if they were privately hosted or publicly hosted, especially with Crucible so close. But it was very much a mellow, you get out of it what you put into it. If you just want to see how everybody interacts, you can just sit back, relax, and nobody will bug you. They might say, hi, how's it going? I'm so-and-so. But other than that, that was it. There was only ever one person we had a problem with there, and that was the guy that I had referenced earlier. And he just very brusquely walked up to my partner and was like, oh, so you're Zach's sub. And she's like, I'm Zach's partner. But that was even broached. I didn't even have to say anything. The guy running that lunch was already being observant, already picked up on it, was like, hey, is everything all right? I was like, it's good. This was a little brusque. He goes, it can be handled. And his biggest thing was that everybody that arrived was comfortable. And there were a lot of munch runners like that in the Nova area. And it was good to see. Also had a bad experience down here in North Carolina with a munch. It was a busy Saturday morning at a local diner, and they had 2 tables put together. We had RSVP'd. They asked that, you let us know how many heads we're expecting. And I know that diner. I used to work dish pit there when I was 17. And so I was like, I understand that. And we RSVP'd. We showed up and they were surprised. And it wasn't exactly welcoming. It was very us versus them. Like, oh, you're the new people. And you can ask Courtney. I'm a chatterbox. I will gladly chat up anybody about any topic. If I've got any relevance to it, or if I don't know about it, I'm going to ask questions because I want to learn about it. But it was like getting blood from a stone. There was one rather warm woman there that had no problem talking with me and my partner and asking, what brought us to the area. She hadn't seen us around. She wasn't part of the community that I was with back in the old days, but most of that was militarily affiliated because then I was a dependent. Now I'm working more with the civilian crowd, and it can be entirely different, especially with the military side. That discretion factor has to be key, and it's just different social mores. But I felt a bit like the old South of, wait, am I wearing Union colors in the wrong place? I'm sorry. But yeah, it can be very hit or miss. The biggest thing you can do is, one of the things I like to do, go on FET, find a munch in your local area, and then watch the message board. See the types of people that are responding there. Are you seeing consistent returners? Are you seeing commentary on how an event went where it went south and was handled poorly? Are you seeing a lot of, hey, this was great, glad to hear, or hope the next one's, coming up soon? Some of them have switched to digital, where they do the Zoom munches, which is kind of amusing as well, especially with the group watch function on Netflix now. But you can look all of them up. FET has been the best central repository I've seen. You can find other BBSs that handle it from the old days, but you're going to get a lot of the more older, stoic, some far more set in their ways. Less of the progressive kinksters that are kind of trying to evolve with the times and understanding that what's coming more into focus, the mental health aspects, the consent aspects, and, the active consent aspects rather than the passive consent that was accepted for so many decades.
Yeah, I've been to a couple of munches myself. And I thought that they were really cool because, like you said, it's more like a meet on a common ground, meet new people, just sort of feel the place out, feel out, people that are like-minded as you, and just have a conversation, really. Like, you don't have to go there and expect anything.
Yeah, you shouldn't go to a munch expecting to be tied up and beaten.
I've been to something similar. It wasn't for BDSM, but it was a meetup of people that were into the polyamorous lifestyle. And it was interesting being in a room full of people that you knew wouldn't judge and understood what you were going through. So
yeah, and the poly. So I have noticed that there's a lot more intermingling of poly and the kinksters because they're a lot of kinksters were already poly before, poly became the term for it. I think before I ever heard polyamorous, I heard ambiamorous. But the intermingling there is very heavy, more so than in the swinging community, because typically swingers tend towards the monogamous side. And I have always had bad experiences with the swinger side because the implied consent of the events is kind of a given. That's the culture. You know, if you're showing up, you're here to party. And I mean, it's changed a little bit in the last couple of years, but well, one of my partner's relatives is big in the Northwestern swinging community. And she's one of the only ones that I know that swings both sides of swinging and kinkster community and does so well, because normally there can be, well, it's always that consent thing. It's the active consent versus implied. And sometimes if you want an implied consent situation, go for it. I mean, if you know you're going to jump into a pile of writhing bodies, have at it. It is what it is. You got to go with your preferences and make sure, as long as you feel safe and you understand that at any time you can get up and be like, all right, I'm checking out. You know, you don't owe anything to anybody. That's the biggest thing I think anybody listening that's looking to get into this needs to beat into their own head before walking into any of these environments, is that there's always an opportunity for you to take a step back and step away and process before you jump into something that you might regret.
Yep.
Yeah, it's like when I first suggested starting this podcast, I was in like a chat group and we started talking about kinks and we all realized how much we didn't know. And, you know, knowledge is the best way to go into any situation safely, because if you know even a little bit about what you're getting into, then you can go into it and not fall for the wrong people.
Yeah.
Or the wrong, like somebody telling you something wrong.
Or be manipulated.
Yeah, that's what I'm having trouble with words right now.
No worries.
But yeah, it's just like through all the interviews that we've done on this show, there's so much to learn that it's like, even if it's something that you're not into, you can still learn something that can apply to something else.
Oh, absolutely.
It's very fascinating.
And the biggest thing is understanding the crossover between what I call the crossover between knowledge and wisdom. You can research a topic and have an idea of walking into. What I consider wisdom in the kink community is knowing how you're going to respond in that situation, or how you have responded in the past to that situation, and better improve it to suit what you would like to present. When I was a shaky kid first going in with my first lash, I was really, really nervous about I worked on horse ranches before. I'd worked with the 12-foot bull whips and horse whips. I'm extremely precise with them, but now I'm doing it to a person. And it's like, your skin's a lot thinner than that horse.
Oh, yeah.
So I had the knowledge of what I was doing, but I didn't have the wisdom of that situation. And I walked away a whole lot smarter then. And that's why, you know, anybody getting into it, I'm like, make sure you're armed with knowledge and make sure you leave with wisdom.
Very smart. Very wise words.
Because the only thing that you have control of in any of these situations is the choice of how you react. And the only way you get better at that is by figuring out how it will react. Now, I am not ever going to tell anybody that's nervous about getting into sadism or masochism or any sort of kink and say, you know, try it till you like it, because that's not the way it works. But if you're going to try it, make sure you know about it. And then once you either feel good with it or don't feel good with it, communicate that with the people you're interacting with. If it's you and just one other partner, let them know how you're feeling throughout it, whether you're a dom or a sub, because especially if you're both experimenting, that active communication helps enrich the process and helps strengthen that bond, because it's like sex. I'm sorry, none of us got it right the first time. It was awkward. If you're not laughing at least once or twice with a new partner, it's not good sex.
I just believe that you shared a meme about that.
I did.
Oh, yeah. I am a firm believer that if you don't laugh at least once while having sex with somebody, you're having sex with the wrong person.
Right? But I feel the same way in like the aftercare period, because headspaces can get really deep. You should never expect it in a scene. And if you're both first starting out with it and it's trial and error, absolutely it's expected. You got to be able to laugh at, okay, look, the instructions say I was supposed to do this, but that hole doesn't look right. You know, it's hilarious. You're dealing with the human body. They put an amusement park right next to a waste processing plant. It's going to be hilarious.
Never heard it phrased quite that way, but okay.
No, I always try to find, especially when dealing with new people or people that are extremely anxious, like, you know, you talk with somebody for, let's see, what's one of the longest waiting periods I've had from the tabletop conversation to an actual scene? I want to say it was about a month. And me and this young lady and her husband sat down at the table, went over the whole thing. And there were a lot of them where they were like, what's that? And so I get into the quick explanation. I'm like, oh, well, it involves this, this, and this. Oh, no, it's complete. Okay, cool, no problem. And so it can help this conversation go more smoothly because now they're arming themselves with knowledge. They're getting a little bit more comfortable with the whole thing. And, we shared a couple more calls. They wanted one more tabletop before we all got together and we went back over everything. I asked them if, there was any anxieties that I could put to bed or anything like that. And she seemed full on board with it. The husband was getting more comfortable with me and understanding, what she was looking for and what I was providing. And we hadn't even gotten the game time yet because I didn't need, I didn't need him giving her grief for her finding her releases elsewhere when he's been there for every step of this process. Because that's the biggest problem I've ever had when doing individual scenes with people is, I'm one of those people, especially because I'm poly, that if I'm talking with a new sub and they are partnered, even if they're monogamous, poly, doesn't matter what they are. If they have a significant other and they're walking into this, I always ask the question, do they know what you're getting into? If it's a marriage, I typically say, if you're not willing to tell your partner about this because of what you're asking for, there's going to be evidence. You're going to want to have this conversation beforehand. As a guy who's been through 2 marriages, I'm sorry, that's got to be key. And there have been ones that I haven't worked with because they're like, well, I don't really feel comfortable talking to them about it. And I'm like, okay, then this conversation needs to end. You should find someone else. But that's just my own personal politics playing into it. And 9 times out of 10, it might open a dialogue that previously they didn't feel was available. There have been a couple of tabletop conversations where we never even discussed the scene. It was, do you know why you're here? And what are you looking for? And we just start the conversation there and you build up to it. But back to this one incident, this girl was like cocksure. She knew exactly what she wanted. She was hard charged and ready to go. I expected her to come in leather chaps and freaking bondage gear with the ball gag already in. And she showed up and was shaking like a leaf. And the first half hour was, okay, is this where you want to be? Is this what you want to do? And, once she settled down, she's like, okay, let me go back through the list real quick. I'm only removing things. I'm not adding anything new. I said, okay, no problem. And she did. And I looked it over. I'm like, all right, we're good to go. And went through the whole thing. The scene was about an hour and a half. Aftercare was about 45 minutes after that. And she was about to back out when she showed up. But being able to talk with her about it, shit, we had probably 3 or 4 more scenes after that. And then husband got transferred to another base. But they kept in touch for almost 6 years after that. But it helped her be able to communicate about it because she thought if she showed up and backed out that, there was some invisible blacklist that I could put her on and no Dom would work with her ever again. And I'm like, honey, we're not that organized. But just being able to talk her back and settle her down helped a lot. But that has to be the mindfulness you walk into it. I for a sadist, that can be really hard because most of the sadists that I know, they spend about a day ramping up for it. With where I'm at now, I kind of just flip a switch. But that's not the way it is with a lot of people. And so they'll spend that day building up and then, they're ready to freaking hammer it home. And if the sub's not on the same page, you gotta understand always, at any point that consent can be revoked.
Yep.
Okay, so as a sadist Dom, what would be one of the most severe things that somebody has asked you to do?
Skin fillet.
Explain.
Please.
Skin filleting. So taking flechettes or razor blades or what have you. And there are people that I know that like to have sections of their skin peeled away from the subdermis.
At first I didn't. You said it too fast, so I wasn't really like what. And then you said it slower, and I'm like, okay, yeah.
Yeah, as cooks, we kind of understand.
Yeah. It is one of the hardest things to do as a Dom because I've only done it 4 times in the entire time that I have been doing this. I've only done it 4 times and it was all on the same person. And by the 4th time, because the first time I did it, it was my first time doing it, but their previous Dom had moved to another state. And so they hadn't had that opportunity. And I was like, well, first off, you're going to give you about a month to perfect this on something other than a human. And then we will start out very, very small because that's where you start. Like with any risk in the extreme kinks, there's always that litigation issue, and some of the things that people want or some of the things that people, ask for very much breach what anybody in the normal and vanilla world would call decency. But you see it in the body modification. You see it in guys that like to split their penis. You see it in, you see it everywhere in the community. And they're, to each their own. When you involve another person, you need to do so as safely as possible, even when it's an extremely unsafe thing to do. But I did get to practice my stitching. But for me personally, that was the single most extreme thing that I've done in my time. My personal, I pretty much only have hard limits on very few things. Everything else is just kind of, if it's on the table, we'll give it a shot. But I don't deal with anything involving minors or human waste.
Yeah,
fair.
And I specify waste because some people just say bodily fluids, but I'm sorry, there can be hot moments where you're spitting into someone else's mouth.
True, exactly. I've had that one, and that is very hot.
Right? Woman, I've seen you in a couple things. I don't even want to hear your shit.
Never had it, but always open to new experiences.
Oh, yeah.
Well, the big thing is it takes a very particular headspace. There has to be, typically the spitting thing I see more in the debasement, demeaning, a lot more of the shaming, because it's that degradation point. Mm-hmm. And it's a very particular headspace that gets there. But once you're there, almost everything's on the table. And it takes a measured and controlled dom that can pull back from that to not go too extreme. Those are usually the ones where I've seen some of the best and most hazardous events happen, not only with myself, but also in public events.
Yep.
Okay.
I've definitely enjoyed that headspace before. I know exactly what you're talking about. And as soon as you're like already in that headspace, and then as soon as the dom spits on you, you're just like, ha, yay, do it again.
Right. Exactly. And the one thing that I would encourage doms to strive for, especially sadistic doms, is to tie your sadistic pleasure to their level of masochistic pleasure. If you can read your partner, as you can read your partner, especially far better, go make it a give and take. And that's usually in the more persistent relationship models. But it helps out both parties, and it makes aftercare a lot easier as well. Because the dom might notice something that the sub is going to come out of the haze or the next day, and they're going to be like, what the hell did you do to me?
Yep, been there. Yep, again, went into that headspace, and that's how I ended up doing my first fisting. And I was like, yeah, I'm definitely into this. Totally, yep, totally into it the entire time. Next day, I was like, oh my god, what the fuck just happened to me?
Yeah, that'll definitely do it. Yeah, and that's the biggest thing, and especially on the dom side, that aftercare isn't just, I think my favorite joke about aftercare is, for the cougars and the younger men, send them off with a juice box and a cookie. But in the kink world, especially in the harder kinks or the more physically abusing kinks, well, even the mentally abusing kinks, I feel it's always best for the dom to, immediate aftercare, day aftercare, week aftercare, and just make sure that all cylinders are firing. I know a number of subs that have, shrinks already. I think all of us have one at this point. And, just check in with them. One reason every time I get to a new location, I've got to go through 4 or 5 of them is I got to figure out who's okay with the kink community. Because there's a lot that as soon as you're like, oh, I like kink, they're like, oh, you sure you don't want something for that? It's like, really? But making sure that they're checking in on themselves.
Yeah, I used to get a lot of funny looks when I talked about the stuff I was into. And I imagine I still do, but I've learned to ignore them. So
there you go. Well, that was like one of my counselors up in Connecticut. Completely fine with kink. But once I was going back to polyamory, then he thought something was up. And I'm like, no, I'm just kind of going back to where I started, where I shouldn't have left. Because, I've bet half my crap twice now and lost. So
okay. So aside from sadist domination, what would you say, having been in the kink lifestyle for as long as you have, what would you say is your top kink, or one that you haven't tried yet but really want to, which I think is less likely?
Far less likely. Top kink. Okay. Well, it all depends on the partner for me, but my two top favorites is I love being a rigger. I love shibari. I love the art behind shibari, which isn't just rope bondage. Rope bondage comes in many various forms, fashions, and everything else. Shibari is a very specific way of laying the rope, doing the knots. It's just as much an art as it is a mechanical form. It was originally designed as police restraint, and then just evolved from there. And I very much like the art of it, and something that, I mean, I've got hundreds and hundreds of rope that I love working with, and I like finding people that feel good in it, because I'm also a bit of I'm extremely voyeuristic when it comes to rigging and photographing. I mean, hell, sometimes I forget that sex is on the table when I'm doing rigging because I'm enjoying the rigging. And it isn't always on the table, but when it has been, I've forgotten about it, and I have to be reminded sometimes. Degradation or humiliation, it does border onto the masochistic side. But the problem is that it has tendrils in everything on the masochistic side. But, regardless of what physically happens, that psychological capability of diving into the enjoy space and come back successfully. Beat me, bruise me, call me names, spit on me, and then, hey, by the way, we're still having the barbecue next weekend, right? For as much as I enjoy it,
I'm glad we got that part.
Well, it's one of those, like, I absolutely love diving into that headspace, but not at the expense of the sub. And that's where I think we see the unhealthy relationships that can form, because usually you will get a partner, doesn't matter male or female, who's trying to meet that need. So they force themselves into that headspace, and it shakes. The relationship starts to take on that tone. And in my earlier days, I definitely had a couple where I had to catch that they were letting themselves be put in that position, not wanting it, and having the responsibility to pull myself back and go, okay, guys, we need to sit down and have a discussion about this. Is huge, but I see it more and more in a lot of relationships. And I always encourage partners to, explore with each other and figure each other out and things like that, but understand not to do so at the expense of your partner.
Okay, and on the other end of the spectrum, what would be something that you have done but never would again, or is just completely off the table? I mean, I know you already mentioned nothing to do with minors
I still
or human
have
waste.
Some issues. I'm very reticent towards CNC, consensual non-consent. The only way I will get into it nowadays is with a well-known partner, a well-experienced partner. But it takes a lot. There's parts of it that I enjoy. Primarily, it's usually to meet that need for them. But if it's a continued thing, I think out of the times that I've done it, I've never done it with the same partner twice. But it also, you can't, with a true CNC, you can't really do it more than once, because the illusion is lost after the first time.
Yeah, true.
But outside of that, human waste is always a big no for me. And it was after trying it. Pegging. I absolutely cannot stand pegging. Because
there you go.
Well, it was one of those things.
Finally, somebody that agrees with me. Because I hate pegging another man.
Well, for me, it was one of those
weird.
I can't do it. We're apparently supposed to have this anal G spot.
We don't kink shame here.
No, but it's no kink shame, not kink shame. I can't. I've already tried it.
It was one of those,
so I can't say that I didn't try.
Debauched individual, you at least got to try it once.
But I can't do it.
Apparently there's supposed to be this magic button back there that's fucking fantastic. Guess what? Not
exactly.
on me.
So
that makes shitting feel good.
Exactly. And even then, when I was doing the pegging, I didn't find the magical button on the man. I don't know if I was doing it wrong or what.
You got a broken model.
It didn't.
You got another me. It just it didn't work right. I don't know. But yeah, it's just exactly, and that's okay. That's the big thing that everybody needs to get through their heads. Yep. Is that it's okay that you're not into everything. I can't count the partners or prospective employers or especially when I was doing it professionally or things like that, I would give them the broad scope and say, here's everything I'm willing to do. And they're like, oh, well, I'm not into a lot of that. And I'm like, that's fine. And they're like, oh, really? And I'm like, yeah, Like, I'm giving you the buffet. You're not going to eat everything on the fucking table.
Yep.
Right?
Kind of like Jay's favorite saying.
Yes.
No king shame.
Yeah, no king shame.
And it's
not
one
king
of the
shame.
reasons I love listening to the podcast is you guys bring up a lot of good, relevant, and solid points. Oh, there was one thing, and I meant to books for the kink side of life, things that would give perspective or, just good reading. Has Jacqueline Carey been mentioned yet? Well, I will answer.
No, actually,
one for you.
I haven't gotten any response to any of the questions I put out.
Jacqueline Carey wrote the Kushiel series. And it starts with Kushiel's Dart. I will plug that book over and over and over again. It is a very interesting perspective on a young lady who discovers that she is pure sadist. She doesn't consent to herself being a sadist, but every time that she finds pain, it translates to pleasure for her. And all the things, and it's set in, essentially she has built her world around Europe, but everything has new names and new cultures. Some of them are very similar, but she's an excellent writer. She develops a beautiful world. She's wrote something like 12 or 15 books, most of which are centered around this universe. But the first the first three focus on this young girl. The second three on her adopted son and how that develops, you find out in the first three. And then they skip ahead, I want to say 50 years, 75 years. And it's an entirely different perspective from a different place in the world. And she's really fleshed this whole world out. But definitely strong recommendation to Jacqueline Carey's Kushiel's Dart. The first three chapters are dry. She's building the world. She's giving you information. And it can be a little bit of a lot. But if you can make it through the first three chapters, everybody that I know that has made it through the first three chapters has read the first 6 books and not even blinked. I would definitely recommend it.
I'll have to check it out.
Yeah, have to look into that and maybe get another book review out.
Yeah.
Because I know the books exist that have to do with,
and honestly,
fetishes,
when it comes to the fiction side, I don't branch out very much. I mean, I get a lot of books on, more of my books are on functionally rigging in different forms, but most of them focus towards shibari. But the rest is research and learning how to use it on people. And the biggest thing understanding is that, everybody's built differently. If you are used to doing a pain rig on somebody and then someone asks you to do a pain rig and you find out that most of their joints are double jointed, you're going to have a hell of a time getting that to a painful stretch. I know, I've been there. Nothing quite weirder than doing a shoulder rig. At this point, you should be seeing the wincing and checking in with them, and she's almost asleep. And you're like, hold on.
All right. Okay. So, overall, is there anything that we haven't covered
I think
that you think is important for the audience to know when it comes to Sadist Dom?
All the major bullet points are always the same.
Anything,
and I think we've definitely
kink and fetish
harped on those plenty. Ask Courtney. We have literally talked for days on this. There's always another shared experience or another example of, or another, and then I remembered this time. The biggest thing is always the bullet points, and that's consent, communication, and know at any point if you are uncomfortable and you're in an unfamiliar setting, you can turn around and walk away. If you want, always normally on first meetings, I always say have a buddy. If you're setting something up with a dom individually, always have a buddy. They don't necessarily have to be there, but have them close. Find a coffee shop nearby and say, hey, here's $5. Go get a cup of coffee. I'll let you know. Yeah. But always do whatever you need to feel safe in a situation. Yeah, and if ever the other party doesn't agree with it, find out why. And if they won't tell you, walk away.
Mm-hmm. Very smart. Okay. Do you have any kind of...
Actually, I can go ahead and...
Twitter,
my Insta isn't as big as I would like it to be for my rigging, but I do have an Insta for my rigging specifically. Let me pull that up because I don't even remember exactly what it was. Oh, it's actually Lara Fuge. It's Latin for wanderer or vagabond, but that is LARIFUGAE. And I tried. It took a lot not to go into military phonetics on that for the spelling, but it's just so hard to break. You spend so long on comms.
Yeah, I do that too.
Right?
When you start to realize that
Yeah,
it's just
exactly.
easier than having
But
to
that is actually,
slow
I
down
think
and
I've only
say
got 4
certain
posts on it
letters.
right now, but that's looking to be expanded. We've recently relocated. We're still putting together my old house in North Carolina, but me and my partner are hoping to get a lot more rigging done once the holidays settle down and all of our traveling's done. And who knows, if I can ever convince her to come down, you might see Courtney on there one day.
I look forward to seeing it.
One thing that I wanted to think
I would
about
enjoy seeing
with
that, probably, yes.
the rigging that I do in the public light, or that is at least public facing, is masks are kind of a thing, especially because I deal with business people, military, things like that, where discretion is premier. So if anybody's looking for a rigger, make sure you bring your own masks if you're dealing with me. We are rather attached to our personal ones. Absolutely.
All right. Well, thank you for being on, and
Well,
thank
I'm
you
definitely
for
trying to get
you
more people
are part of
pointed
the
towards
reason
it.
why
It's
I'm
just
still doing it.
getting back comfortable with old
Because-
communities, dealing with new communities, things like that. I'm plugging it where I can.
And it's very much appreciated. So if at some point you decide that you really got a Jones to talk about a topic,
Oh yeah, the only
you
time
get a
Courtney
hold
and
of
I go
us,
more than a week without
be more than
talking is
happy to
usually
have
when
you
she
back
can't
on.
talk because she's out doing military things.
Pretty much, yeah.
Fair. But until then, got to do the shout out. Thank you for the financial support. And if anybody else wants to help support us, we have the Patreon. Links will be in the show notes. If you don't have the money, you can tell your friends, tell your family, tell your mom. Told my mom. Rate, review.
Sorry about that.
That helps too. We have merch. Links for that will be in the show notes. Twitter, Facebook. Just search the show name and you'll find us pretty much everywhere. Haven't made it Instagram yet. Going to work on that. But until then, keep
Thanks a lot, Jay.
communicating,
Have a good
keep
one.
each other safe, and have fun.
Thank you for listening to Ludiverse. If you have any questions or comments, contact us on Twitter or Facebook. Just search for the Ludiverse. Remember to rate and review wherever you listen. If you want to help support the show, please consider donating to our Patreon.